After working with over 4,000 business owners in the past few years grow and scale their company, myself and my team have come up with 7 red flags that we identify and solve as quickly as possible whenever we find them inside one of our clients' businesses. In this video here, I want to go through what these 7 red flags are and how you can put in measures in order to solve these or even avoid them if you don't have them yet. If you don't know who I am, my name is Ravi Abuvala. I'm the founder of Scaling with Systems, where we help other companies grow through the use of leverage. And in the past few years, I've probably answered close to 10,000 different questions from multiple different businesses and multiple different industries at multiple different sizes and multiple different stages. And from those questions, I have been able to kind of boil it down to 7 very simple but very important warning signs that we need to look out for if you're looking to grow your business this year and in the coming years. The first red flag to look out for in your company is when you or somebody else is putting band-aids on bullet wounds. What this means is that most people are typically predisposed to fixing something and fixing it in the fastest and easiest way possible. And although that's ideal for maybe making sure that things are working tomorrow, the problem with that is you're putting a band-aid on a much larger problem, and that problem is going to continuously pop up over and over and over and over again. And then you're going to continuously be spending that same amount of time putting another band-aid on and another band-aid on, another band-aid on, when instead, if you just took a little bit more time in the beginning to identify the real problem with it and then put a system in place to solve it or remove it entirely, that amount of time that you took, although more than what it would be to put a band-aid on, and although it's a little bit more difficult than it would be to put a band-aid on, can save you so much more headache and, more importantly, time in the future, as that problem's inevitably going to come up again. The second red flag you should look out for is what we call rearranging chairs on the Titanic. And I see this all of the time. A client comes to me, and to myself and our team, it's obvious what the problem is, right? It's this huge thing that's blaring, but then the client starts going on and talking about this other problem over here that has nothing to do with the real reason why they're not seeing growth. For example, they may not be seeing growth because their sales team is underperforming, but instead of identifying that problem and solving it by maybe the founder taking the sales calls, instead the founder or the owner is talking about how they need to work on a little bit more branding. They need to start getting on podcasts, and they need to be on YouTube. They need to start an organic channel over here because somehow that's going to solve the problem. And that's what we call rearranging chairs on a Titanic, because it's like, okay, you could do all of that stuff over here, but even if you do that and you do it perfectly, it's still not going to solve this blaring obvious problem over here. And a lot of times, similar to number 1, it's easier to go solve this thing over here, like starting a YouTube channel or starting to shoot videos, than it is to maybe fire a salesperson or maybe step in as the owner and take sales calls. And so because it's easier to do this thing over here, we're going to be more willing to do that, even if it doesn't actually solve the long-term problem of the business. The third red flag to look out for you or your team is going to be making emotional and not data-driven decisions. In my opinion, most people don't grow their businesses not because they're not trying hard enough, but it's because they're not actually working on the stuff that they should be focused on, similar to what I talked about in number 2. But how do you know what things you should be focusing on? Well, you start collecting data, and then you start displaying that data in an easy to use and easy to consume fashion, and make sure everybody on the team at any time can see that data. Because I think a lot of mistakes that entrepreneurs make is that, number 1, they don't even track the data in the first place. So instead of knowing, hey, the sales team's doing well or it's not doing well, or we're up on booked calls or we're down on booked calls, they're just kind of going with whatever the availability bias they have at that moment. So for example, they have a client say, oh, I don't like your product or service, and they think, oh, the company's going down, we're ruined, there's no way we'll be saved. When in reality, if you had a percentage of, let's say, lost customers, and you could see that less than 2% of your total clients were what you consider lost customers, then you knew that although that person could be right that this isn't the right thing for them, it doesn't mean that your business is going under. But a lot of people, because that person just gave us that feedback first thing in the morning, we might make all these emotional decisions around changing our offer and changing our structure and changing how we service our clients, when in reality, that's simply just the cost of doing business. And then the second side of making data-driven instead of emotional decisions is making sure that everybody on the team team is aware of what numbers you're tracking, how to define them, and then they can easily access those numbers. I see it all the time where people do have good data systems in place. However, they kind of hoard this data. For some reason, they don't want to share it with the rest of their team. And there's a saying, I think by Charlie Munger, but it's like what gets measured gets managed. And so if you're not saying like, hey, every day we're focusing on this one number right here to your team, then you can't be upset if they're not growing that number, because they may think it's this other number over here. So for example, if maybe the number one thing you care about for marketing is number of qualified booked calls, but your marketing team, the thing that they care about is the number of new leads, well, sometimes those things are not always correlated. So the marketing team thinks you're doing an amazing job getting new leads, but you're upset that they're not getting enough booked calls, but that's because you're not sharing with them the dashboard to say that this is the thing that I'm looking at every day and judging what your success in this position is like. The fourth red flag to look out for in your business is constantly reinventing the wheel. If you're in business and you're in business long enough, ironically enough, especially as the owner, business should get easier with time. It should be simpler with time. You shouldn't be working the same hours, 2, 3, 4 hours into the business that you were in the very beginning. And if you're doing that, that's a huge red flag. That means you're probably constantly reinventing the wheel. So what do I mean by that? I mean that you're probably not documenting key processes and key terms in your company so that other people can do that work for you. So if, for example, you've always done all the client success and you've always handled everything to do with client success as soon as someone pays you, well, then if you are growing and you're getting more and more customers because sales is working and marketing is working, but you haven't documented what are the key processes for fulfilling on the people that you're closing, then you're always going to be involved in that process. And even worse than that, you may be doing a new process for every single new client that's different than the last client. Inside of our company, we have both a sales and a marketing department. And the problem was that they both weren't speaking the same language. What marketing defined as a booked call wasn't what sales defined as a booked call. What marketing defined as the date of the booked call wasn't what sales defined as the date of a booked call. For example, marketing thought a booked call was just anybody that booked a time on the calendar. Sales thought a booked call was only the qualified people that booked a time on the calendar. Marketing thought that a booked call date was the date they actually physically clicked the button schedule to book a call on the calendar. Sales thought the booked call date was the date that they were scheduled in order to actually have that call. And so all these little things, if you compound them over a company that has 30, 40, 50 people and multiple different departments, they can explode into a process where more people are spending time just trying to define terms and thinking, is this the right thing, than they are actually getting work done. Red flag number 5 is not having a stop loss for team members. So if you're not familiar with the word stop loss, it's an investing term, but it essentially means that you are putting in a rule that if this whatever asset goes below this dollar amount, I want you to immediately sell this asset because I don't want to lose any more money. So just as an easy example, you buy a share of Apple for $100 and you're saying, hey, if it ever goes below $90, just go ahead and sell it because I don't want to risk losing more than $10. That's my kind of threshold there. And so you put a stop loss in, and then let's say the next day, the Apple stock goes down to $70. Well, then it sold at $90 for you, and your loss was only $10 versus your loss being a full $30 in that example there. It is even more important to have stop losses for your employees. So kind of going back to some of the other red flags we talked about earlier, if you have data and you've defined the key processes and key terms for each department, then you can easily say, hey, we're going to onboard you, but in the first 14 or 30 days, you should be hitting this number here. And if you're not hitting this number here, we're going to have to let you go from this company. And I can't tell you how many of our clients had struggling businesses, not because of their offer or their marketing or anything like that, but because they had the wrong person in the wrong seat. And it was because the person was doing just good enough in order to not get fired, but they weren't at KPI. They weren't doing good enough to keep the company growing and profitable. Red flag number 6 is stepping over dollars to pick up pennies. This essentially means that most business owners, whenever they are trying to grow and scale, they're so focused on the little, $5 to $10 hour in activities, and they're saying, oh, I can't afford to pay somebody or hire someone to do this for me because I don't have enough money, when in reality, instead of focusing on the highest dollar per hour activities like marketing or sales or creating this amazing product, they're still checking their email or, God forbid, checking their mail or, confirming their calendar appointments, when you could easily delegate that out for $5 to $15 an hour. So instead of just paying the $15 an hour and have that be maybe a few hundred, maybe a few $1,000s a month, where you're able to make, tens of thousands of extra dollars a month, they're quote quote unquote saving the hundreds of thousands of dollars, but in lieu of making the tens of thousands of dollars extra they could use if they had more time and energy focused on those bigger activities. And red flag number 7 is when the emperor wears no clothes. And you've probably heard of that saying before, but it essentially means that people are too scared to criticize somebody or something, and so instead they don't say anything, even if it's as severe as the emperor not having any clothes on, but nobody wanted to embarrass the emperor, so they didn't say, hey man, you're not wearing any clothes. This happens in businesses all of the time, and I see it happening one of two different ways. Number one, the CEO of the company is running the organization, and even though that they think they're doing an amazing job, the people below them that are their direct reports maybe don't appreciate their leadership style. Maybe they're too overbearing, maybe they don't give accountability, maybe they don't give clear instructions, but instead of giving that feedback to them, they're so afraid that if they say something like that, that they might get fired. They kind of keep it bottled up inside until eventually they leave or something worse happens inside the company. And the second area that I see this in is in the actual product and the client satisfaction of your products and services. So if you don't have a consistent way in order to get feedback from your clients, such as satisfaction surveys or even one-on-one calls where you can ask them for their honest opinion on something, then you may think that you have the best product or service in the world, like all of us business owners do, even though you may be having some real problems boiling underneath the surface. And in both of those examples there, I can speak from personal experience, even though getting critical feedback of how you're being as a leader or getting critical feedback of how your baby, your product or service is doing hurts in the moments, if you actually action item it, you can solve it. And over time, that compounds over and over again until you are an incredible leader that's having an amazing product and service that's really impacting lives. And so even though it's like that short-term hurt, kind of like that bullet over the bullet wound, even though that hurts a little bit in the very beginning, over time, you can build something that's incredible and you can impact as many people as you want to while leading an unbelievably talented team. If you don't mind, please let me know down below if you got value out of this video and maybe send this to somebody who needs to hear it.